Hi, everybody. Welcome to Learning Circles, part 5 or 6 or something like that.
586.
Yeah, we've got a skeleton crew today. Everybody's got meetings, so we're going to probably keep this a little bit short. Enzo and I are here with you today. It's probably just going to be he and I chatting, but we were asked a question from last week about 508 compliance and compliance in e-learning, so we thought we'd chat about that a little bit. I believe Marvin Williams was the one that asked the question. Enzo, is that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's Craig's friend.
Yeah, so Craig's colleague, a friend, buddy. We sent him a link, so not sure if he's going to join us or not, but in the meantime, Enzo, why don't you set the stage? What are we talking about when we talk about 508 compliance, or how do you see it?
You know, I had to do a lot of that when doing technical training, especially, right, at previous jobs and all. And it seems to be a topic that comes and goes depending on what company you're working with. But in past jobs too, that was a very prevalent topic. We always had to consider accessibility. 508 compliance was something that, and some people don't like the word compliance, right?
Right.
I don't know what to exchange that for, but anyway, it's compliance. You're agreeing to providing accessibility, but it's just semantics. So we had to always keep that in mind, and when doing things with authoring tools especially, we always had to keep in mind when adding items like a slide, for example, to add an alternate description for whenever the readers, the automated reading devices or software tries to read the screen that on the output, it reads, a description, an alternate description of the media. For example, if we had, and it's, to me, it always seemed very loose, the definition of how to actually provide compliance to accessibility, right? Some people went, and individuals, designers went all the way from describing if you had a person talking to another in a scenario, in a sales scenario, whatever it is, you had to describe. Person X is to the left, and they are talking to the person on the right. They approach them in environment, in a water cooler environment, blah blah blah, and then they say this X, Y, and Z, right? And others just went to, there's a picture of two people talking, and here's what they say. And so it was always very personal. A personal choice, it seemed to me. And to me, I always went into the documentation on what is required, and I never really saw anything very specific to it. And I think my question is, how much of it do we have to add by hand, for example, to make something compliant, and how much of it are our authoring tools actually providing that context for the learner? Do we need to describe media, as in text enters in from the left to the right and it fades out, or how much of it is enough, or what is necessary for compliance, at least the minimum common denominator? Because to me, it was never very clear. Everybody was doing their own thing.
Yeah, it seems very strange. I know it was a big deal talking about authoring tools, right? Since I guess this is where the question came up when we were talking about authoring tools with Joe Ganchi a couple weeks ago. 508 came up, and I had somebody actually in a different forum ask me the same question. Does anybody know of any tools that are 508 compliant, or whatever? And and it got me thinking, about the governing body that says, oh yes, you're compliant or not. How much does it go through? And then of course, just myself, I just kind of have these internal battles within my own mind, playing devil's advocate. I'm like thinking to myself, well, like you said, what are the rules? What's the minimum that you need to do, to make it compliant? And then it gets me thinking back, also kind of connects a couple thoughts and areas that I've been talking about recently, and just and hearing other people talk about it, right? So we talk about smaller chunks of learning. We've people talking about micro learning, micro videos. I've always talked about podcasting and how just the features of podcasting are so cool because of the RSS feed and the capabilities. So just it's not just oh yay podcasting. I look a little bit deeper and I look at what makes podcasting so cool and valuable. And yes, the content is cool, but I love the delivery mechanism of podcasting, right? The idea of subscribing to content and basically opting in and saying yes every time you create some new content or you create a new audio file that you upload. I want that to automatically be put into my queue of things that I do. So it seems like a natural progression to me. Like if you had a queue of learning, and you subscribed to different learning topics or whether those were LMSs or whether it was just a subject matter expert or something, that every time they created something new, you would get a notification, or you would get that content would just get put into your queue of learning, and your workflow, over time would just get used to consuming that content and looking at it. And obviously, if you were super interested in the people creating that content, you'd be excited about new content and be looking forward to it, right? This is the piece of engagement that we often lose as training developers, is that we forget about the part of, hey, content needs to be enjoyable, it needs to be entertaining, and wouldn't it be great if we could get people to want to take courses? I mean, maybe not necessarily courses, but want to consume the content that we create in whatever format it's in, whatever we call it, And so when we look at the type of media that's being created out there today that people enjoy, it's just basic media, right? I mean, I start to wonder if maybe it's the learning industry that kind of took things way too far into the authoring world and trying to be interactive, right? And with clicking, dragging, and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, maybe for testing and assessment purposes and things like that, that type of interactivity needs to be done. But I think for a lot of content, you either write it as text and people read it, and so the skill you need there is to be a good writer. And text tools that we have on the internet today are already take textual content and make it 508 compliant or readable within particular reading devices, or turning it directly into audio and whatnot. So we've got that covered. If you create a podcast or audio or just record yourself talking, or a subject matter expert, there's tools that can take those files and automatically convert them into captions, or create text out of them, or you as the designer or developer know to create both. Take your audio, have it converted, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. I think just going back to basics is a really interesting idea, something that I think our industry really needs to take a look at, and we need to be able to tell people, yeah, if you really need some interesting interactivity and some hardcore interactivity, the authoring tools that are out there are great. They're easy to use, and you can create some really fun, engaging learning concepts, but just creating basic media is still really viable, and people really can learn and engage in that content.
Yeah, I agree. Although, a lot of times we are producing, so when we are producing highly engaging, and by that I mean highly interactive content, right? There's clicks here and there, and pop-ups, and slide layers, and all that kind of stuff going on, and a game-based approach in whatever authoring tool. Besides going away from just the audio and video, then how do we remain compliant when compliance with 508 doesn't only imply providing, when there's audio or video, provide a transcript? right? There's more to that. There's flickering and all that kind of stuff. If you go into the details, you pretty much, I feel kind of helpless when I look at that actually as a designer. I'm like, I can't do anything if that's the case. Or do we do one complex, experience that is what we designed initially, plus a more trimmed down, I don't know, watered down, I'm not sure, version of it without so much interaction, without animation, without things like that. In past jobs, we had departments that would check and see if you are compliant, and they had their own checklists. And then if you look here on the Section 508 website, gsa.gov, they have a checklist in a PDF that to me is also very vague. The first item is when packaging files for inclusion HTML pages include all necessary information. How do I know what all necessary information is? So I got to go back and research somewhere else because there's no linking, there's nothing there, right? We got to make sure document files does not contain spaces or special characters and all that. But little details like that. So if you look at number number 6, I don't think everybody is doing that even. Like all audio files have accompanying transcripts, and then you get into really detailed things like 7, graphics, animations, movies, or other objects avoid strobing, flickering, or flashing effects. And
yeah, I think what that one refers to is just don't don't use like an animated GIF that does things really fast and whatnot.
Which we would avoid normally anyway, right?
Right.
When you design good content, it's in the subtle effects, is how things blend in together, and not just shocking people with bright lights and all, and strobing and all that, right? So I would think most of us are compliant to that without even knowing. Then number 8, I saw many people do, and that I worked with in the past. I've done that myself, is providing a text-only version of it. Or sometimes when you're doing something in an authoring tool like Captivate, Articulate stuff, Lectora, whatever, you provide a PDF version of something and attach it to the section, the resources tab or something like that, so people can, instead of going through the interactive version of the course, they can go through an actual text-based version with some screenshots if needed and stuff like that, but it's just text for whatever is mentioned in audio or text on screen. Something they can take with them, a PDF or something like that.
Yeah, well, this is a good doc. This is a good find. It certainly simplifies the conversation for us a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Is it? I mean, it makes. Does it oversimplify it though? I mean, is it?
Yeah.
Does that really cover everything that we're supposed to know?
Yeah, and it's all there in the best practices section there. It's just that you have to dig for information, and in the end, it ends up being a little subjective, right? There are so many disabilities out there. I myself, I'm deaf on my right ear. I can't hear anything out of it. And as a designer, I wasn't aware of it, of how it affected others. Because one day I designed something that had audio narration to it. I didn't realize that my recording was in mono. I didn't notice the difference. I can only hear out of one ear anyway. So then somebody emails me saying, "Why is the recording only playing in one headset? Why is it in mono?" And I'm like, I don't know, is it? It's like, so there are so many disabilities there that you're not even aware of,
Yeah.
And I think there has to be a minimum common denominator there, and there are some strategies you can use, like, for example, just printing out a PDF version of it that people can go at their own pace with their reader or whatever it is. And it becomes very time-consuming if you are going to abide by every single detail and, and add descriptions of what appears on the screen as a graphic and all that kind of stuff. Unless the graphic is super essential to the understanding of the content, then does it need to have a description to it? does the graphic actually need to be there on the screen? If it's not essential at all, then it brings up questions like that anyway that are good to ask anyway.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure myself.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic that certainly should be covered more heavily by some people that are more knowledgeable in it than we are.
I want to see people that are actually doing that. I haven't been doing much accessible content lately. I haven't given much thought to it as
And
much as I should.
and honestly, I haven't even really heard that many people even talk about it
Yeah.
recently or that much, right? It used to be a pretty hot topic at conferences and things like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, maybe. I mean, just that fact alone is a little bit interesting, right? I mean,
Yeah.
maybe is it that we've got enough content online right now as a learning community that people are finding what they need to be able to make their content compliant, or
Is it because Or is it because the technology itself has evolved to the point where it can provide most of the context needed for the learners that are going through it? It can read because now we don't have those enclosed, encapsulated Flash files anymore that are because everybody's publishing HTML5, this and that, and accessible and all that kind of stuff that we hear, all those buzzwords, right? But maybe there is a good side to those buzzwords that are the content is more readable. It's less proprietary now that we have technologies like the next step in HTML, this HTML5, for example.
yeah, I mean, it's a great point. It kind of brings us full circle a little bit in the conversation, right? I mean, back in the day when we talked about it so much, all of this stuff had to be regulated and forced people to create certain types of content. But nowadays, yeah, you're right. I mean, has the technology progressed to the point where they're just the community that requires the accessibility? That's the word I've been looking for this whole time. Dang.
Wow.
Has the technology gotten so good that the technology handles a lot of what they were frustrated with 10,
Mm-hmm.
15, 20 years ago, right? I mean, is it now so good that they're like, well, it doesn't even, it's just not such an issue anymore. So the complaints don't now trickle down to the designers because everything that we're doing, whatever the delivery mechanisms that we're using, are handling a lot of that compliance for us, or the tools that they're using to consume it is handling a lot of the conversions and a lot of that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
everything that they need, their needs are being met by the hardware and the tools that they're using to consume an instructional designer's content.
And
So
I would love, yeah, I would love to see something at a conference like DevLearn, ATD conferences and stuff like that. I would love to see a panel like this where we have people with disabilities, different ones, hearing disabilities, vision impairment, motor skills, whatever it is, and designers talking about that, because I do wonder, and this is just conjecture,
sure,
because I do wonder how much of the modern technologies are making up for our designer flaws. Because
yeah,
I mean, we're human. We can only predict so much that is out there. Some disabilities are unique to each individual, and we don't know what exactly they need. Right? We talk about that whole stuff, that whole multiple intelligences and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's something that we can't make up for. Is like, what are all the different individual needs that we can't predict? How can we actually adapt to them? And that's something that I think would be worth talking about. Is how much of it is compensating for what we fail as designers.
yeah, indeed. I'd love to see it as well. Like I said, I haven't seen too many people talking about it at events and whatnot. And so it'd be really interesting to get some feedback from people who either create that type of content a lot or have that requirement, or actually have some folks that need to consume our content that way and hear directly from them, what
Mm.
is you know, what is the state of the accessibility industry these days? I mean, I think that at a higher level, I think would be more interesting for me. I mean, you know, what
What's
is
out
it?
there?
Get a big picture view of accessibility today
Yeah.
versus 15, 20 years ago, right? And then naturally everything that we do will kind of trickle into that, and everybody will be able to make their own connections. But I'd love to hear that.
Yeah,
And,
I mean,
you
and
know?
only not only when you talk 508, I think we're talking in the American, U.S. context, right? I
Yeah,
wonder what's out there worldwide in general
yeah.
too. Uh, what are we missing on as designers and consequently our learners might be missing out on as far as accessibility goes? That would be very interesting to know, and I confess that I haven't been to many sessions like you have either, right, about 508 because there's not much out there lately. If you go to section 508.gov/best-practices, there are a lot of best practices out there. But that's just from one point of view, right? I'd like to see what people are actually doing in the field. And maybe that's where we leave it at today, maybe a couple more minutes here. But I would like to, you mentioned Brian Dusablon doing some stuff or has done things in 508 lately, or other people that have done that. I would love to see them comment on it. You know, what is out there? What's the state of the art? Is the technology really catching up to the point where the designers don't have to worry about manual process as much to make things accessible?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think you're right. As we approach meeting time for for us all, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. Doesn't look like Marvin's going to join us, which is fine. This is actually pretty cool. It's picking one topic like this and just kind of chatting about it briefly for 20 minutes or so, and then calling it quits. So yeah, I would also say, you know, however we can, let's throw the question out via Twitter, via Google Plus, via our networks and whatnot, and just see what we can find out,
Yeah.
and maybe come back to this particular recording and see if we can gather some information and see what's going on. Either we'll continue this in 2 weeks, maybe do a brief follow-up before we move on to another topic, or maybe we just address it again once we gather more information. So
Sounds good.
yeah, as always, Enzo, wonderful chatting with you. Thanks for hanging out.
Good talking to you.
All right, take
See
care.
ya.
We'll talk to Craig, and yourself in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.
All righty,
Bye.
bye-bye.